they ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
2 hours later.
My hair hasn't dried right because I wasn't able to use hair conditioner because we have no running water today. So can we pretend that the 80s big hair was intentional? I need us to pretend that it was. Hey you guys, as promised last time, today is style study time, and this week's video was requested on Discord and reacted to by multiple people, and I'm so glad that it was, because this style is really going to help me hit many of my own art goals, and I hope it is for you too. But today we're going to look at the super beautiful, extremely high quality illustrations of CHEN. As a senior illustrator for Riot Games, the guys who made Arcane, Bo's work is... Hi. Hello. As a senior illustrator for Riot Games, the guys who made Arcane, Bo's work is so inspiring and there is so much to learn from it in terms of technical skill, so I hope you're ready to have multiple level ups today. So thank you so much to Jewel for requesting this video. I hope you love it and that it's everything you've been looking for. If this is your very first style study, please do listen to the rest of this intro, but if you're coming back, welcome. I am so glad you're here. Thank you so much for coming back. I love you, and you can go ahead and skip to part 1, timestamps are in the video description below. But if you're new here, hi, welcome. I am so glad you're here because today we're going to level up your art skill by like 1,000,000%. Style Study is a regular series we do here on my channel where we take a look at some of our favorite contemporary artists, analyze their work and see what we can learn from it. Keyword, learn. We are not here to copy anyone's style or plagiarize their work. We're only here to learn some cool art techniques and see how we can apply them to finding our own unique art style. I usually structure my style studies in 3 parts. In part 1, we'll take a look at Bo's work, analyze his style and see what we can learn from it. Part 2 will be a study of one of his original paintings. The reference I've chosen today is this one. And in part 3, we'll apply everything that we learned today to an original painting of our own. As always, if you enjoyed this video and learned something today, please remember to like and subscribe. Comment below any artists you'd like to see a style study on in the future. But now, if you're ready, grab a snack, sit back, and let's dive into another style study featuring CHEN. CHEN is a professional illustrator and art lecturer from China who is currently located in Los Angeles. He currently works as a senior illustrator for Riot Games, and in an interview with Bobby Chu, he mentioned how Riot provided him with English language tuitions to help him get over the language barrier, which is honestly so nice of them. He has previously lectured at the Guangzhou Academy of Art and worked with Applebot and Lenovo in the past. He also won BlizzCon in 2014 and 2016. His beautiful character illustrations have garnered him over 90,000 followers over on ArtStation and over 67,000 subscribers here on YouTube. If I had to categorize Bo's art, I'd say it is character illustrations with lots of storytelling. He has an amazing command over composition and rhythm in painting, and although the lighting setup may seem fairly simple, and we will see why this may be a little later in the video, his art is still extremely polished and tells very vivid tales. So today, instead of hyper-focusing on the character design like we usually do, I want to take a look at the overall technical skills and stylizations that he uses in the entire piece as a whole. Because Bo's skill doesn't just extend to beautiful characters or costume design. In terms of art expertise, Bo is very much a generalist. Speaking of lists, here are 4 key characteristics to CHEN's art. The very first thing you'll probably notice about Bo's art is how the composition is super dynamic. In the action scenes, you can almost feel the frantic pace of movement, but even in the calmer pieces, there is this sense of liveliness in the scene. The characters may be stationary, but it doesn't feel dull or still. And this is due to the leading lines in his work. Well, there is a very specific set of leading lines in pretty much all of his paintings, and it is these ones. See how there are these two lines radiating down and away from the character? They usually end up forming an inverted V shape or an upright triangle that leads straight to the character's face. It's quite literally like an arrowhead pointing straight to the face. However, these lines serve another very important purpose, and that is to open up the scene. Oftentimes, we tend to make the bottom of a scene quite dark and narrow, causing the foreground to feel a little calmer than all the action taking place in the midground or background. However, by extending these wide open leading lines into the foreground, he's almost inviting us, the viewers, into the chaos of the scene, almost like we are right in the middle of all the action. To add to this, there are often very dynamic tapered curves right in the foreground, which kind of simulate a centrifugal force, like everything is spinning in circles around the character, like you would see in a tornado. So tons and tons of action lines. And the other important point about composition is the placement of the character. In the calmer scenes where the character is static, you will see that they are usually situated in the foreground, but in the crazy high energy scenes, the characters are pretty much always in the midground, making it look like they are fully caught up in the whirlwind of it all. I thought that was a pretty cool, subtle way to show dynamism. When you have such busy, dynamic scenes, it is easy for the character to kind of get lost in it. In order to avoid that, you'll see that Bo uses very strong character silhouettes. Through leading lines, light and shadow, and a ton of negative shapes, he helps us find a focal point amidst all the chaos. One important way he does this, like I said, is through light and shadow. He uses light character elements against dark backgrounds, shadowy character elements against light backgrounds, and my favorite, dark and light character elements against a mid-toned background. Another way he separates the character is by using atmospheric perspective and blurring. This is stuff we see all the time, where the background elements are low contrast, pale and blurry, while the midground and foreground elements, which is where the character is, are higher contrast, dark and sharp. This creates a sense of depth within the scene, but also allows the sharper silhouette of the character to really stand out against the less detailed background. But a unique aspect to Bo's silhouette is that it is not just the character that causes the interesting shapes around the edges. The silhouette often also includes other things such as weapons, elaborate armor, or just any objects the character is holding. So here you'll see this whip thing that is causing a huge crossover here, which then loops back to the character, a great additional leading line. Here, this stage thing is cutting into the character's silhouette, and here you see Jinx with her many weapons that create fun angles in the silhouette. This to me feels like another subtle way in which he's saying that the painting is not about the character. It isn't just a character piece with a background stuck on after. Instead, the character is simply part of the entire story, to the point where even their own silhouette isn't just about them. Pretty cool, hey? When it comes to lighting the scene, Bo usually opts for a single giant light source, usually either behind or above the character. You don't often see a secondary light source, and any rim light you see is usually just from the primary key light hitting the edges. So here you'll see that there is a very warm sunlight hitting the entire scene, making it look like golden hour, and the same warm light is hitting the edges of the character to create a rim light. I don't know about you, but I never even thought to use this technique before, but how smart is that? Because it truly does add an extra bit of dimension to the scene without adding an extra light source. However, there is another effect that having a single big light source creates that we don't even consciously register. It makes the scene feel massive. Think about when you see one gigantic light source that illuminates an entire scene and also creates rim light and dappled spots of light. The sun, right? The sun is absolutely massive. Wow, the most profound thing I've ever said, the sun is big. No, but yeah, it is big enough to light an entire planet, and that kind of gives us a sense of scale. So in using a singular gigantic light source that not only illuminates an entire scene, but is also intense enough to create a rim light, Bo is kind of giving us the feeling of it being an open air scene rather than being trapped indoors with limited lighting. There are of course paintings with the more limited lighting and secondary light sources, but I felt like these single light scenes was something that we could truly learn from today. Now, as a character artist, I definitely want to take a minute to talk about the characters themselves. Most of the time, Bo paints very conventionally attractive characters with idealized faces and bodies, pretty straightforward appeal. But there are a couple of details I noticed in like 90% of his paintings. First is that the skin is usually cool toned. This is probably because the light source is usually cool toned, but there is this bluey, purpley hue to it, especially in the highlights. You'll also see that the hair is quite flowy, with these really sharp little highlights at the edges of each section, which kind of makes them look almost metallic, so definitely super silky hair. There is also a kind of glossy texture to the skin. It feels like an oxymoron, I know, you can't have gloss and texture at the same time, and we'll look at this in more detail in part 3, but you'll see this almost texture to the skin. However, it is painted in with the highlight tone, so it kind of adds realism like skin texture, but without adding shadows or quote imperfections to the face. It's like the clean girl makeup trend. It looks super real and believable, but still extremely perfected. But like I said, we'll look at that a little further in part 3. For now though, let's sum up part 1 of this video. Here are the 4 key characteristics to Bo Chen's art. Number 1, he uses leading lines not just to create an arrow to point straight at the character's face, but also to extend the dynamism towards the foreground. Along with other dynamic elements, as well as the placement of the character within the scene, this creates a strong sense of movement in his paintings. 2. The silhouette goes a long way to separate the character from the background despite all the chaos in the scene. However, the silhouette generally includes other story elements such as weapons. Number 3, Bo uses a singular light source as both an ambient and key light, thus creating a sense of grandeur within the scene. And number 4, the characters are often conventionally attractive with idealized bodies, flowy hair, and cool toned skin. So for our study this week, this is the beautiful reference that I've chosen. I actually chose a cropped version of it because otherwise we'd be here all day, and immediately regretted choosing this painting to study because this is probably my least favorite head angle to draw. As with most paintings, I started with iterative sketching. For those of you who are new here, I don't know if iterative sketching is a legit term. I never went to art school, but what it means is that I do 2 or 3 iterations of my sketch, tightening and neatening up the lines with every new pass. The biggest challenge, believe it or not, was getting the metallic moon thing right. Oh my god, was that a struggle bus. Though to be fair, I did this study on Monday and that was also the day I was super ill, so maybe that was a big reason for how awful it felt. I then went in and did my flats as always. This time I couldn't be bothered to perfect the line art to use the enclose and fill tool and Krita, so I just hand painted the flats. What's weird is that I broke this painting down into 4 different sessions, and at the end of each one it looked completely different to how that session started. And I feel like this is a huge lesson in trusting the process. There is just something about this style in particular where it builds up in layers, rather than something like Sam Yang's work where you can just replicate the surface details and get a similar end product. With CHEN style, you have to go through the motions of refining everything a little, then going over everything again and then again. As always, I went a little too high contrast. That is something I always do and don't know how to not do, but I actually did a quick little fix by making a new layer and painting it with a solid grey and then lowering the opacity. What this did was basically cloud everything over and reduce the contrast really quickly. All in all, this was one of the hardest studies for me personally, but the end product actually turns out pretty passable. For the original painting today, I went with the 3rd prompt on our October challenge, which was Midnight Pomegranate. I have the entire prompt list up on my community tab if you want in on the challenge. Midnight Pomegranate was actually a Bath and Body Works scent that I was gifted many years ago, like when I was 14, and I haven't found it anywhere since, and it is still the best thing I've ever smelled. I do remember that it was a very rich velvety smell with a slightly fruity sharpness to it. Honestly, just how I like my men. Okay, but for real, I wanted to emulate that feeling a little here, so I wanted her to be wearing a luxurious red gown with maybe some spiky ornaments. The fan was that extra silhouette element I wanted to add in, and rather than try to match the style of the facial features, I wanted to focus on that cool tone skin and flowing braid. That braid and the skirt of her dress are what form that triangle shape, and since it is a fairly calm scene, I kept her in the foreground. This time I did go for 2 light sources since I wanted this to look like nighttime because midnight, so I went with a cool ambient light and a warm rim light. Okay, let's talk about the skin. As you can see, I put in a very blue highlight on the high points of her face, while the shadows are a lot warmer. And it was super flat toned, so I definitely wanted to blend. However, I didn't do it with a blender. Instead, I used a chalk brush and blended via color picking. When you use a lighter hand on this brush, it puts down a lot of texture, and that is what I wanted with the blue highlight. Like I said in part 1, the highlight adds skin texture but without creating darkness or blemishes on the face. That's a pretty cool way to add a little bit of realism without adding quote imperfections. You definitely don't want to blend away all the edges because otherwise you lose the form and it looks too flat, but I definitely wanted her skin to look like it is super smooth but wrapped around a skull with very sharp features. That fan went through a lot of changes, and I mean a lot. I wanted more pomegranate imagery, so I stuck some seeds on it, and looking back, that triggers the hell out of me. Does anyone else get super triggered by like bumpy clusters like that? Ugh, kind of like tryptophobia, but inverse. Anyway, after a few more hours of rendering, here is the finished painting. I hope you like it. And there we have it, CHEN demystified. Do you feel leveled up? I know it was a lot of information to throw at you guys in one video, but I know I feel super leveled up today. Thank you so much again to Jewel for requesting this video. You've honestly done me a solid, and I hope that you've enjoyed it and that it's been everything you've been looking for. And if the rest of you guys have enjoyed this video and learned something today as well, please remember to like and subscribe because it really helps the channel out so much. much. And like I said, if there are other artists you'd like to see a style study on in the future, first check out my style study playlist. I'll leave it up here in the outro. Chances are I've covered some of your favorite artists on there already, but in case I haven't, feel free to leave a comment below letting me know who you would like to see a style study on in the future, or you can come tell me in the Discord server so your request doesn't get lost in all the comments. I always share my finished paintings and even step-by-step reel thingies on my Instagram, so if you're not following me on there, I'll leave a link in the description below so you don't miss out. But with all of that said, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Check out some more style studies up here, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye!